All right. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Terra Prime Live Sword Lab. We are here today. We are going to be doing a whole thing on Kung Fu, Chinese martial arts. And with me uh, for that discussion here is our council members, knights, instructors here, Damon Honeycutt, General Sun, and Ben Chosun or Ben Judkins. How you doing, guys?
Excellent. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. So yeah, so I thought we'd get together and talk about the various arts that we kind of delve into in behind the scenes, the Chinese arts. They obviously, since there's so many of us, play a bit of a role in the curriculum, as it were, at TPLA. But also because a lot of people ask, what styles of kung fu would be good for lightsaber, and what would be great for what styles of this, that, and the other. So we'll take some time and just kind of go through different traditions of that, so to speak, so that we can more just get into the how the our system bridges the kind of differences and stuff like that, and incorporates stuff. So that is the idea. Anyway, to start off, we can just kind of go through our backgrounds, obviously. Just real quick, my background lies in Taiji and Masha Tongbe. I've done a little bit of wushu in the past, and some other styles in that, but those are my main styles, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. Who's next?
I'll go, I guess. So my original art was Dance and Ryu Jiu-Jitsu, which is Hawaiian. And then I studied some Kempo Karate, some Wing Chun in there, and a bunch of mixed arts, Kali and Eskrima. I was kind of just really going through a lot of things, Capoeira for many years. And then I found Paulie Zink, was given a letter of recommendation to study with him. And then I really devoted myself to Dasheng Piquamen. And then that got me into working with the Peking Opera. And then I felt something outside of the expressiveness and then the internal alchemical aspects of Dasheng. And then I went to Hu Jincheng, two-time all-around wushu champion. Moved out to the East Coast to study with him years ago. And then there I was influenced by Yu Chung Hoi. And then my last teacher was Jiang Yuheng, who was an opera performer as well. And I studied with him at the New York Chinese Cultural Center. That was only for a year I studied with him. I paid him for a private lesson every week for a year.
Yep. Okay, good. Yeah, and we both, I've also studied with Yu Chen Hui, so we have that in common.
That's right. That's one of the places where we really meet.
Yep.
It's awesome.
So Ben, how about you? Want to go through?
Well, my background's a lot similar. I mean, I've done a number of things, most of which, did not involve weapons, or kind of more boxing oriented. But my main martial arts style is a style of Southern Kung Fu called Wing Chun. I'm in the Ip Ching lineage of that. Ip Ching was the second son of Ip Man. And that's really kind of where I was introduced to weapons work as well. There are two main weapons that they teach in Wing Chun. One is a big, long, 9-foot, 11-foot long pole, which is really kind of like learning how to fight with a pike. I suppose it's one of those things that was eminently practical at some point in the 19th century. And the other thing that they use are two shorter knives. And, I actually developed an interest in fencing when I was learning the swords, these very long knives. We sometimes call them swords in Wing Chun, and you had to kind of learn a little bit about Chinese swordplay so that you could be the loyal opposition to whoever your classmate was who was working, the two swords at that point in time. And I began to think about things and develop an interest in kind of combative swordplay at that point.
Okay, yeah. So obviously it's diverse. It's a diverse group even within Chinese martial arts. I mean, Chinese martial arts is a gigantic category.
It's huge. It's just huge.
Yeah, I mean, you're dealing with however many years of continuous history, 5,000, something like that. On top of that, you have these major renovations and renaissances of martial art that happen periodically. Ming Dynasty, Republican era, 20th century, probably. I would say I would argue around the 70s and 80s, the Wushu Revolution and all that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, it's an enormous. When somebody says kung fu to somebody who practices it, it's like, can you narrow it down? Because there are so many styles out there.
Yeah, and some are just very family related, some are temple related, some are lineage related, some are contemporary, like my style, Dashong Piqua Men is, really formulated in the early part of the last century. I mean, Piqua or Pequar is really old. And different styles of monkey boxing are really old, but this specific style is not really, it's combination isn't, it's a little over 100 years old.
Yeah, well, that's actually a good point that maybe we can talk about first, is especially with the Chinese martial arts, there is definitely a mystique and a kind of attitude of, oh, these are ancient arts. From my own background, Tai Chi Chuan, right? Everybody says, oh, it was created by Chan Sun Feng in some primordial whatever, this, that, or the other. My own research can only trace it as far back as maybe the beginning of the 1800s, or the end of the 1800s, as far as anything concrete. Everything else is word of mouth by authors after the fact.
Yeah, as soon as the martial arts become bound up with nationalism, which is what happens in the 20th century, the martial arts must be ancient because the nation must be ancient.
Right.
And of course, nations aren't, right? Before China was a nation state, it was an empire, right? Before you had, Austria, you had the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. The truth is, countries, nation states are kind of recent, but man, are they good at spreading a mythology of, an ancient, unchanging past. And yeah, martial arts are, they've been part of that process.
And I think it gets put on top by people practicing in very elaborate outfits. It's almost like there's so much of martial arts that kind of involves cosplay in a lot of ways. I mean, I dig wearing my traditional clothes, but it's really but most of the time when I work out, I'll wear nice, comfortable, loose pants and t-shirt and things like that. Just, casual. If I'm doing a photo shoot or something, I'll look cool, but then I'm kind of playing it up.
Sure.
And, but I think, Ben, you're absolutely right. This nostalgia just gets compounded that way. And I am completely fine being new school. I have no problem doing that. And I think so many people, I think what happened, not so many people, that's not the right way to say it. I think what can happen is that when we begin to evolve as artists, somehow we always look to the past for an immense amount of, I'm not sure if it's validation or something. It's good to honor the teachings of masters that have come before and everything. I absolutely agree with that. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. However, if one practices diligently and authentically, whatever that means for that person, I think you arrive at things that probably have been discovered before, but you yourself discover now, which are important to add in one's process.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And if you would, if we talk about garb, right? Like with the lightsaber, you know, the Jedi garb and all that kind of stuff goes with it. But you're talking about like you know, and you use the air quotes, you know, traditional Chinese martial art costume and stuff like that.
Yeah, which is just like clothes, really.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like the thing that you buy on Amazon that says Tai Chi uniform, like turn of the century was just street clothes, you know. It's just what you bought, you know, at the local shop. You know, oh, does this fit? Yeah, okay. And then you walk
Yeah,
out.
man, it's like kung fu Dockers or kung fu Levi style, dude.
Yeah, right. You know, but like my teacher Ma Yu, Yu Chenghui, my teacher wears bicycle pants, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
you know,
Yu Chung Hui, he had like those green pants,
shorts.
and he would just do his sword form in his loafers half the time.
Well, oh, and also he like he was famous for wearing those crazy little bicycle shorts. You know, they didn't they gave no f's about anything. You know, and they're like, why do I have to dress up? You know, this is comfortable.
Yeah, kick your shoes off and go.
Yeah. So there's, you know, there that mystique is really there, and I kind of see, you know, kind of, as people go through this, there's like two kind of camps that kind of diverge, right? And then there's those of us who kind of like get over here and try to bring things back together. But like some people will kind of go on the that traditional lore mystique train, and the others will go on this reality train, right? And they'll start to diverge, and then you get these arguments that you have now, right? Which is what's good for what and what's this, and you know, all of that kind of thing. So the people who've done Sanda and you know that kind of thing. Oh, but Daniel is coming in.
Someone new. Oh, hey, right on.
Daniel, how you doing?
Almost drunk.
Almost drunk. Okay, that's how we like it.
Are we broadcasting?
We are.
Like other people can see this?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, no. Well, cheers.
Everybody say hi, Daniel. in the comments.
Dignity is a relative concept, isn't it? Oh dear. I guess I just dropped in to tell you how nice it is to see you after spending 4 important but nevertheless excruciating hours on a departmental meeting on Zoom. Zoom, it's like this love-hate relationship, right? You can see
Yeah,
your
well,
friends, you can
Can't
see
live with it, can't live without it.
Yep. Nowadays, no. But yeah, so we're just chatting about the mystique and the kind of looking toward the past and kind of inventing that past as you're looking back, because especially with kung fu, because there's a lot of these stories around. A good example: how many people here, just sitting here, have the story in somewhere in their lineage of a master who held a bird on his palm and it could not lift off because he was so sensitive that it would push off and would move his hand like that?
I have to
Right.
admit, we do not have that one.
my alleged Sihing, my Kung Fu brother number 2, Sylvie Wong, did that with a chickadee in front of me.
Well,
You saw
I
that.
mean, for like 4 or 5 times before the chickadee got really pissed off and pushed hard. But
well, see, here's the thing with this story, right? And the stunts where people do it, right? It's
Like
you're not really doing it, because here's the thing: a bird that small doesn't need to push off of anything to fly.
and you
all you're doing is using it by bouncing it up and down. It's going, what the heck is going on?
and it
You know?
totally it leaves as soon as you're out of food. Like a chickadee is happy on your hand, but when it realizes you're screwing with it and you have an empty hand.
Yeah. So the
Empty hand.
Right. So
The
whole
empty hand chickadee.
ridiculous, right? But I have heard it told to me from several martial arts, right? Like, oh yeah, my master did it. It's like it's a circus trick. It's it's like the spear to the throat,
Oh yeah.
But anywho, my point is that those types of things, those types of stories get passed around.
It's like telephone, generational telephone.
Right, yeah. And so you get these two camps, the people that kind of go with those stories and the people who completely and utterly reject them, as a completely separate thing,
Well, I think some of those stories can be pretty metaphorically inspirational, like any philosophical text. And I think if you're taking them literal, well, just good luck. And but it also gives you something to strive for. I mean, geez, it would be cool to have such a balance that, it's like that scene in that film Palaquatsi, where like the dude's sitting there with a stick and then there's a bird on it and it flies off. And it's like, it would be great to be that still, to have something happen like that for me. I don't know if I'll ever achieve that, but I'm sure there's people out there that can do some pretty amazing things, like all the athletic stuff, people jumping around and running up walls and doing all this crazy.
Oh yeah.
I mean, look at all the stuff that all those parkour people do, jumping from rooftop to rooftop.
Oh my God, yeah.
I mean,
it's
so why not? I mean, people are going to embellish that. And then he had the power of Mercury, and then like, there he goes.
Right.
Who knows what that's going to look like, and who people are going to look, what in 150 years or more, who's going to look at or hear stories about the founders of parkour, like David Bell and Sebastian, and what kind of incredible mythological stuff is going to surround them.
Did you just say Bell and Sebastian? I think
No,
Yeah.
David Bell.
I know.
Sebastian. Oh, I guess that's funny. But you know what I mean? I mean, they're very
absolutely.
Totally.
Well, that's the thing. What my teacher Gabriel was very old, so he brought a different type of perspective to a lot of these things, in that he was from the era that a lot of people talk about, right? And so, like, let's take the concept of Qigong, lightness skill, right? He basically boiled it down. It's acrobatics. It's learning tumbling and jumping and flipping and do all that kind of stuff. And nowadays, parkour would be the thing. In fact, they're incorporating it. Like the guys at Wudong, the monks at Wudong, are like running up the walls and all that kind of stuff and doing all that kind of stuff.
Hey, it's fun to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'll save you in a cinch.
Those poor dudes they're so bored, right?
Oh yeah.
Like they're just stuck up there, and yeah.
Well, now they got.
I love those videos, right? But like, you can see, like, it's just like, what can I do that I didn't think of yesterday in this environment that I've been trapped in since I was 16? Like, it's really something.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that's interesting, bringing this back, around and getting our swords back into the conversation is, of course, swords are the ultimate mythological symbol, right?
Yeah.
If you're looking for a symbol of a nation, you got swords, right? If you're looking for a symbol of martial virtue, you got swords. East, west, everybody has got their magic sword. And for so long, swords were only kind of on that mythological pathway. Those were the martial artists who you saw doing weapons, right? They were guys who were really into traditional culture and things like that. And it's really very recent, last 10, 15 years that we have seen interest in kind of recreating more practical weapons work and really beginning to see I began to see with my Sifu, we got interested in doing combative work with, Wing Chun weapons. But, that is a pretty recent phenomenon.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I guess I have this question for all of us, maybe. What inspired us? Because we all work with forms, but what inspired us to understand? I just thought about that, like what Ben was saying, like what inspired you to realize, wow, how does this weapon actually work? What inspired you to think that way outside of your teacher saying, this technique does this?
For me, it's just I've always been into, like into this stuff. So like for me, it's like I want to do the stuff like Zorro. So it's all a matter of like,
Nice.
how do you get there? You know what I mean?
Oh.
Oh, Anthony is joined us today.
Anthony has like gone through 77 amazing backgrounds since he's joined us.
Anything's better than the stuff behind me right now. I've got boxes of stuff back there of like all my collectibles, and from your camera view, it looks like my basement's a mess, but I swear it's only this section. Everything else looks immaculate. So
yeah, the exact opposite for me. What you see looks nice and orderly, but if I just tilted it down, you would see the disaster.
I have this is the COVID book pile. So we have a little bit of a problem in that since COVID started, I've ordered all these books. More like February, but
you're obsessed about it like me.
Yeah, like I'm totally out of shelf space. So I've made this incredibly orderly pile to pretend that it's not happening.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry I'm late, gang. I
Don't worry.
Last minute got roped into cooking dinner, and
no problem.
I had myself a nice drink.
Yes. So why don't we go on with
Damon's question.
Yes, but let's go Daniel and Anthony. They can start off by just giving what's your martial art background, from your Chinese martial art background, and then answer the question that Damon posed, which is what got you into trying to understand the forms rather than just do them.
Tag, not it.
All right. I started practicing Chole Foot with a gentleman named Xiumeng Wang in Montreal in 1993, September 4th. And since then, I learned Wu style Taiji from Xiumeng, and then I learned Chen style Taiji from Chen Zhonghua. And I did a whole bunch of other electives, I suppose, in Chinese martial arts. I loved a little extra detail in the Chole Foot system. I learned most of our forms had been created by this, I later discovered, massive genius named Leon Kai. It's Liang Qi in Mandarin. And he made this short stick form. It was called the Shunglong Guan, which is you would hold the stick in the middle and manipulate it as a kind of double-ended baton. And it had all these moves that later I discovered were straight sword, Jian, or Gim moves. So this form was the second thing you had to learn, and it was like massively hard. Like,
was it really long?
It was really long, and it had lots of fiddly manipulations in it. It didn't have full acrobatics, like it didn't have flips or kips, all that kind of thing. But it basically, after that form, very little was difficult on a manipulate this object kind of level. And then I got to the Gim form that he'd made for his Taiji set. He had been a student of Wu Jinchuan, Wu Kamchun, who was the founder of Wu Style. And they'd apparently been in the Hong Kong militia together fighting the Japanese. And this is likely a bit of a fiction, but Wu Kamchun was the only person in the militia that Lun Kai couldn't beat up. And so Lun Kai became his disciple. And he made up this awesome Gim or Jian form that I learned and was really related to that short stick. So I got really like, these moves, this is so crazy. Like, this is so hard to do and so technically exacting. How would you fence with this? And I was very fortunate to get a job where I had enough money to travel. So I like tracked down all the last people who knew anything about Jian, who were visible on the internet. And so that was my quest, I guess. Yeah, it's totally a quest to see like all these forms that you get, like all the weapons in Cholefoot now, like something like a guando, like you're supposed to use a guando on a horse. So it's for chops and conditioning and, you know, your kind of martial virility. You're not using that weapon as it was supposed to be used. So it was really cool to try and track down and see, how is this thing that has become an artifact, how would it work in a fencing situation? So that, I mean, I'm still there. I'm still into that. And that's kind of my preoccupation. Yeah.
Cool. Yes, that's probably why we're all here. Anthony, it's to you.
I love lamp. I'm messing with you.
Lamp?
Love lamb.
We're talking about martial arts.
I know. You want to
Take your
hear
medication.
just my weapon experience, or
Just your Chinese martial arts experience, what style you come from, and all of that, and then how you got into the finding out how everything works and kind of thing.
okay? Well, as far as Chinese martial arts, I started that around 1982, from New York City originally, and I was the first exposure to a Chinese art was Jeet Kune Do. I was training under Mario Pontillo, who was a boxing champion at the time, but he was also Ishinu karate and Western boxing, and of course did JKD. And at the same time, I was doing Kali Eskrima. So I guess you could say that was my first exposure to Chinese kung fu. It wasn't until late 80s, early 90s when I started training under Sifu James O'Brien in Fujian White Crane Kung Fu. And then in 1995, that's when I discovered Wing Chun. And that's been my sole focus ever since. So right now, my Sifu, who I'm a disciple of, is Sifu John Crescione out of Long Island. And that's pretty much it. Not much else.
And how did you get into the whole figuring out what was behind the forms with the weapon stuff?
Well, I guess I was lucky coming from a competitive background that the people that I trained with always pushed application, and not just application, but understanding the attributes of something. Like, we're doing this for this reason so that you could develop this attribute. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like mystery, it wasn't like, here, you're just going to do this form. It was, you're doing this form to develop this, So I don't think I've ever had the problem of one day coming to the discovery that I have to figure out what these forms are. It was just something that from the beginning, my teachers always pushed, not just telling me what the concepts, principles of the word and the form was, the energy, but also pushing me to constantly explore and make it come alive instead of just forms, just doctrine and so on.
Cool. Ben.
So I actually kind of have exactly the opposite experience, as Anthony there. My background in Wing Chun was a kind of a very practical, combative thing, to the point that I wasn't really sure that I wanted to invest a huge amount of time in the weapons. Because, legitimately speaking, in real world self-defense, what is the probability that you get jumped down a back alley by 3 guys who have 3-meter long poles, right? It's like, there are certain scenarios that just aren't as likely to come up. And so it's like, why am I doing this, right? What is the point there? But I have always been very interested in history, and I was already writing my book on the history of the Southern Chinese martial arts at the same time that I was getting ready to do my weapons training. And so when I was actually approaching the weapon forms, I kind of treated them as a chance to deconstruct the historical background of Wing Chun a little bit, right? There are things that people say about the art. There's information that is conveyed about the art and kind of the lineage histories or the interviews that people write down before they die, right? But there's also information that is conveyed about an art in its embodied culture, right? There are these habits of bodily movement that get picked up and they get passed from one generation to the next generation. And, I began to wonder if you couldn't actually figure out a little bit, not just about like, where the art was from, but what kind of world that actually was that generated it. What was the life experience of the people that generated this practice by looking at the sorts of, movement and the way they dealt with space and the way they dealt with timing and rhythm and the weapons they chose to teach. And so for me the martial aspect of Wing Chun weapons were kind of a gateway into beginning to understand what Southern Chinese life was really like. So it's probably not a coincidence that if you joined a militia in Southern China in the mid 19th century, they fought a lot of wars, right? You get the first Opium War, the Red Turban Revolt, the second Opium War, the Hakapunti War. I mean, there's like a lot of conflict that happens in really quick succession there. If you join a militia, the two weapons that you are most likely to be issued as, a village militia member are a really long stick. Maybe they put a spear point on it, maybe they don't, right? So you got your spear about 3 meters long and a set of butterfly swords. That was just standard sidearm for military troops, right? So then what are the two weapons that Wing Chun teaches? A really long pole and butterfly swords. Oh, well, immediately when you think this is an art that really originates in the mid 19th century and you look at the weapons that get taught, you learn something about the world that it came out of and what the concerns of those people were. And then it's interesting, we lost Daniel, but if we get him back, right? If you talk to people who are in Choi Li Fut, if you talk to people in Hung Gar, they've got all of these weapons. They have so many more weapons than we have in Wing Chun. But you ask them again, what's the first weapon that you get taught? Generally, it's the pole. It's a long stick. What's the second weapon you get taught? Generally, it's the butterfly swords. And again, those were the two standard weapons that you'd have to know how to use if you ever got stuck in a militia in Southern China. So, that's kind of the way I ended up beginning thinking about and unpacking these forms, as kind of a historical project, sort of, taking the forms as a text and trying to read them in a slightly different way.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. It's definitely a good angle. Damon, how about you?
Well, considering that my first art was dance and jiu-jitsu and everything is lists and practicum and done with a partner, I think it was like similar to Anthony. There is this ingrained thing in my body to want to discover things. But at the other side of the coin, when I started really learning forms, I really just focused on the forms. And later I really wanted to discover for my own interpretation of what those were. And what really inspired me to do that is Jackie Chan, to tell you the truth, because he fights with everything. So I figured like, wow, if I can do this with a da dao, I want to do it with a crowbar. If I can do this with a staff, I want to do it with a ladder. So I started taking my forms that I knew and using everyday objects with them and figuring out applications that way, weapons wise. Did that for years and years, and then found other teachers. Like I did some Western fencing with Gay Jacobson or Gay Desaro back in the day. She was a silver medalist Olympian, and just cross-trained a lot to fill the gaps and just studied. And then when I added aspects of the athleticism of wushu and then the grace of the opera, I think that it rounded out my ability to see things more And then learning partnering as a dancer, when I toured as a dancer, that just made my grappling a lot better because I could listen a lot different. So it was a really kind of like pendular swing for me of like refining form, distilling application, refining form, distilling application. And then when I got involved in the lightsaber community, I thought, here's a perfect test to see what, you're just gonna see what can happen.
Yeah. And that's obviously where we came from. Me and Matthew were trying to find ways to spar with each other. He's HEMA, Chinese art, and the lightsaber provided that ability. You could come together. You wouldn't have to worry about. You kind of have the same issues to deal with, and the same. Kind of evens the playing field a little bit, and then you can get in there and really see what that's about. And that's the thing. I mean, forms are one of these controversial things. They're such a big part of Chinese culture, because if you look through pretty much any style of learning in the Chinese milieu, you will find some kind of version of basically you're going to mime this to get you used to it. You know what I mean? I know there's even stuff like that in calligraphy.
Yeah.
Going through motions in a very rehearsed fashion and stuff like that. But it's always brought up. It's like, oh, well, that's no good for fighting, or whatever. Now, to an extent, I agree, right? We're not going to get into anything saying, oh, yes, no, you can totally do these jumping. Yeah, sure. Certain people can pull these things off in a real situation, but more often than not, people are going to have difficulty in doing flying tornado kicks in the middle of a fisticuffs with somebody, just because of the dynamics of things. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's not something that we're really training for. But that leads to people saying that they're no good for anything. I can't tell you how many students I've had who've just wanted to fight and not do the sets or do the things. Now, I will admit, you don't necessarily need to do forms to be good at martial art, or whatever, this fighting thing. But they offer some benefits, which I think can be, gained by everybody. But anywho,
I think forms have a lot of benefit. I mean, when you're training your legs in a deep, horse stance, if my legs are strong down there, when I'm standing upright, my legs are going to be great. Sure. It's like kind of like saying to a weightlifter, like, oh, well, why are you lifting so much weight? When are you ever really practically going to lift that much weight?
Right.
No one's like looking at those weightlifters and going like, oh, that's a bunch of useless crap. Mm-hmm. Like, what are you? What? It's like, that's what I mean. It's either one or the other. It is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
I can do a tornado kick, but you know what? And never in my right mind would want to throw that.
Right.
But just because I'm not going to throw it in a confrontation doesn't mean I want to train it, because you want to know why? It gives me a lot of proprioception, it gives me a lot of explosive speed, and it gives me a lot of damn dexterity. And to not train those attributes like that is just silly.
Yeah.
It's just silly.
The big thing about forms for me is this, and I've said, I would say this to people, and they would kind of like look at me kind of strange and say, look, if you go back and you look at your training, if you're a serious martial artist, the majority of your time training is by yourself, right? You do not have a partner. You cannot spar. You cannot, do that all the time, right? And I've gone through this before, in here. Forms help develop athleticism that is specific to fighting. It's not fighting in and of itself. My teacher was always very clear about that. Both of my teachers, all of them, right? In that the form is not fighting itself, right? No.
Can we even take this back to even something simpler, Chad? Let's talk about rolls. Like just rolling. Like when I studied Danzanryu Jiu-Jitsu, the first 6 months, at the Medford Judo Academy was rolling and getting thrown. I
Right.
didn't even learn, maybe I learned some Yawata, but I hardly ever learned anything besides rolling and getting thrown. And I'm like, my God, like, huh? But and who thinks of rolling? People think
Right.
of rolling like they get down and they do randori on the ground and put each other in locks and stuff, and that's cool and everything. But I mean, but who thinks of just like jumping off a balcony and rolling? But you know what? I can't tell you how many times having that rolling and falling training has saved my ass. Like just from getting out of the way of a glass falling on the ground and breaking to tripping over myself when I'm carrying something in front of my face or something silly to like, you know, grabbing my kid when he's running towards the street or something. It's just, that's where it all comes out. And I think that's where people really make the mistake.
Well,
You know, can I chime in
sure.
Please.
before I lose my thought? I find it kind of interesting because I'm actually good friends with a lot of MMA people. And for years, and this is not a slam against MMA, I love MMA, you know, but for many years they would kind of poke fun at form work, you know, and now we're in a situation where everyone is pretty much forced to be alone all the time. And what am I seeing? MMA schools, not just small ones, famous ones, creating forms to help preserve their skills. So I kind of find that entertaining. I do, because for years and years,
that was happening. That's
sport martial
so
artists, and
funny.
I was a sport martial artist, so I have a lot of respect for that. But I'm also a traditional martial artist, and I always said no, forms are important. I've always said that, but they would make fun of it, and now they're forced to be alone.
Yeah.
And here they are putting out YouTube videos of, hey, this is the new MMA form for our gym, and
that's awesome.
I'm cracking up.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the thing. I kept telling people is like, if you're really training, then you're going to be training, you know, 80% by yourself. So that means that you don't have somebody putting that pressure on you. You got to do something to make up your skills. Everybody poo-pooed that. Now everybody's forced alone. Now back to your point, Damon, about the rolling. You take rolling, you take, you know, extended postures, low stances, acrobatics, what have you, right? If you train these in a drilling kind of situation, right? Like if I take as a personal trainer and I say, what we're going to do is we're going to do, you know, 16 rolls around here, down here, and then we're going to go over here. Yeah. Nobody bats an eye. The moment you say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do a roll to 3 side kicks, 2 punches, hit that low stance, jump up in the air, do a flip and land back down. Then everybody's like, what's that good for? You know, it's like, well, each individual piece you didn't have any problem with. As soon as you start linking them together, all of a sudden it becomes useless.
Actually, it just becomes harder.
Yeah. And that's really what it is. When people are seeing, you know, it's like, yeah, that's, what's that good for?
It's like when I'm training my parkour kids, it's like they'll do one technique, they'll do, okay, we're doing a cartwheel. Okay, now we're doing a handstand. And then as soon as I say like, okay, now they do a Kong vault. And I'm like, okay, great, you did a Kong vault. Now I want you to do a cartwheel forward roll into a Kong vault. And the first time, and even the second time, most of them don't make that vault because their inertia and their energy is taken away so much. Yeah. And it's a huge learning curve. And I think if you have forms that have a lot of integrity that do that to your practice, that's really right on, because then the singular move, no problem.
Yep. Now, one thing that we can transition, we should probably just give some sort of lip service to here, because it's the biggest thing when talking about Kung Fu these days, is what is our opinion of this whole Shu Shao Dong thing and the kind of weird kind of things that are like traditional, like the kind of weird clashes between modern.
I guess I am really out of the loop because I have no idea what that is, or if I do, I don't.
Oh, this is the Chinese MMA fighter who's going around beating up Tai Chi masters.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, so he's fighting dudes. Who cares?
Lots of news sources do.
Yeah, well, good for them. You know, it's like it's okay. So I guess the is it that people are worried about that he's exposing like, oh, these guys really are fake or something,
Oh,
or they quote unquote or something like that? Is that what it is?
That's what he's. That's his
I
little his little.
I have a lot to say.
Well, go ahead.
Okay. I've been following this very closely, and my friend Sean Madigan and Alex Richter have
Yeah.
talked about this on their
Alex.
podcast.
Yeah, I'm sure Alex has a lot to say.
And here's the thing. I understand where the guy is coming from, because at the end of the day, bold claims, right? You know the rest of the saying, right? So, you know, if you make a bold claim, you gotta back it up with some pretty compelling evidence. So I understand where the guy's coming from. But come on, you know, let's go find people 100 pounds, okay, I'll even say 50 pounds lighter than me, who are almost twice my age, and let me go pounce them. Or not even twice my age, just some little dude and pounce on them. It's
So, you know,
ridiculous.
I haven't watched a lot of this guy's footage. I looked at it, but I mean, honestly, I mean, as you know, with me, it always comes down to someone's mindset, and it just looks like he's just going around beating up dudes who only do form work all the time. And I'm like, well, that's kind of silly. Like, there has to be people out there that have an integration of both, right?
Well,
that he could
that's the
certainly be
thing,
fine,
yeah.
right? Is that it? I mean,
Well, the background that you hear amongst the circles is that he's very picky who he fights, and it's basically sure wins. There are schools, and I know one of them, who are beasts. You know, one of my cousins, and I'm not going to name names because I don't know if you guys want me to do that, but this guy legitimately trains his fighters in Wing Chun for their stand-up and Jiu-Jitsu for their ground. And he's not knocking at their door. And when they, who actively compete in MMA in their country, have challenged him, they don't get replies. So I think it's kind of ridiculous. You know, if you really want to prove that, you know, traditional martial arts is crap, then go find the traditional martial artists that are actually actively competing and fight them.
Okay, so here's the big question. Okay, he's in modern China, right? I mean, he's doing this now, right?
Mm.
Shows you how much I know about it.
Right.
It's hello cultural revolution. Like, aren't so many of these people kind of just like sport dudes anyways? Like,
Well,
and if he must have some beef against
so the beef
aspects of what's going on in that country with those martial arts and how they're represented, because he's, you know, that's, hey, you know, it's making discussion, and there's always someone stronger out there.
Well, okay, Ben might be able to fill in some of these gaps here, because I know you know a little bit more about the political side of this, because this, you know, there's as I said, there's a political side to this, at least from the fallout standpoint, and why it's not just something that you can just kind of blow off as some guy being, because he's got the government riled up. He's got the Chinese government like concerned about this, because what he's doing is he's going around and he's choosing people. At first he was choosing people who made claims of being, you know, this, that, or the other, right? Okay, fine. But then he started challenging people like Chen Xiaowang, who are not only respected masters, but they're very friendly with the Chinese government. They're not, you know, so.
Oh, so dude's making a statement.
Oh yeah, he's definitely.
Yeah. Well, then that's really his mission. It's probably not about fighting at all.
No. His statement is basically that the traditional martial arts are superstitious or what have you. But anyway, Ben, do you have anything else you want to add into that?
Yeah, you know, you got to remember that everyone in China at some point is talking about this. This is all over their social media. Very few people in China do martial arts, right? Contrary to the Western perception,
Right.
martial arts aren't particularly popular with most modern people in modern China today, right? So then you got to ask, well, why is this then such a big deal, given that 99% of the time, most people just have no F's to give about anything to do with martial arts, right? This is a purely ideological event. I don't know how Shu sees it. He might have started out just trying to like, advertise for his MMA gym that he used to have in Beijing, right? So it may have started off with something that was very practical for him. But the people that he went after were people who had shown up on government-sponsored TV programs. And the government has invested a lot of time and money in China into building up the martial arts as a global diplomatic tool. They're trying to create soft power behind the martial arts, so they can say, look, China is a rising power, but you shouldn't necessarily be afraid of us because we have all these great cultural attributes that you're interested in, like Tai Chi, right? Everybody loves Tai Chi, right? It doesn't look very aggressive, right? And so now you have this one guy in the country who's decided, I am going to punch every Tai Chi master in the nose and totally delegitimate, that 10 years of effort that millions and millions of dollars have gone into. And, as the government has pushed back against that, he has pushed back against them, and, now he has been saying things about what's going on in Hong Kong. He has been saying things about the government response to COVID-19. And so he has become a little bit of a political dissident.
Yeah, so he's straight up activist style.
The more he has gotten pushed,
Now,
he has become an activist. And so this has kind of exposed the political dimension of martial arts, which is pretty much the last thing that the government wanted, right? That was not why they put all that effort into promoting Tai Chi abroad, was to politicize it.
Right.
But, it gets back to that fundamental insight that starting in the late 19th, early 20th century, discussions of martial arts became, for many people in Asia, probably for most people who were involved with it, discussions of nationalism, right? Mm-hmm. Nationalism and ideology go hand in hand. And, he has a different vision of what a modern China should look like and what the relationship of the state and society should be than what the government has, right? So you have these two different contrasting visions of state and society that are being played out through two different discussions of what should martial arts be.
Right. Yeah. And when that gets then filtered down to the kind of general public, it takes on these diametrically opposed polarities, which, as we're talking about the things, doesn't really jive. It's way more complicated and sticky, with all of that kind of stuff. But I think that's probably one of the reasons, like what we're talking about with, people believing ridiculous stories and going through this. Like I said, there is an aspect, and Damon, you said too, there's an aspect of cosplay in martial arts. There's an aspect of imagination in martial art.
And there's also an incredible aspect of denial.
Yeah, right. It's true.
It is, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I want to hit you with this pressure point. I want to know the technique of the pressure point where I hit my opponent and it makes them crap themselves in the middle of the fight. Then it'll be the ultimate technique and I'm ready to go make $1 million.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think you can kind of do that by hitting them anywhere hard enough.
That's true. But I mean, that denial is serious. And I think, and it's a fine balance. I like my robes and flowy pants too.
Yeah.
However, I don't don them every day. I don't, it's something that I look at maybe once a year and I'll get in and I'll feel, and it feels great, but they're also incredibly hot.
Yeah.
and not the most comfortable things. And that, but I think people who live with more and more of these artifices, or like sheaths of illusion, hamkara, right? I think the more mysticism I can attribute to my art, the less of reality I have to be in.
Right.
I think that's really interesting because ultimately, for me, I can't speak for anyone else, it's striking that balance. Because I used to be so hardcore fighting, and now I'm older and I'm like, it's just silly. Like, okay, fine, you could fight. Okay, good. I feel, but I also find great joy in like learning the mythology of whatever it is, you know? And so I think sometimes people can go off in one or the other direction a little too much.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that makes sense.
you know, I've seen so many people in, you know, in Wing Chun who look at the movies, and I mean, I'm going way back. I'm talking Michelle Yeoh, I'm talking Prodigal Son. They think that is what it should look like. And I'm like, no, those are the movies, man. You know, but it's still cool. I mean, I still think Prodigal Son is the greatest movie ever.
Is that where he fights that Bach Mei dude with the rings?
Yeah.
Yeah.
His rings are hurting me. You know, I love that, you know.
Frankie Chan was doing dragon style in that.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, that's the thing. It's like what the nickname that I gave it for the people that live too much in the fantasy, I called it the Dungeons and Dragons Kung Fu. It's like, you know, they're going to throw down a mana card, you know what I mean? And I think if we can strike that balance of being aware that the fantasy stuff is really cool, but also understanding that it's still fantasy and there still needs to be a realistic element there, I think that's important.
It's and that again is one of the things that we love about lightsaber is that that balance is effortless because we're dealing with a fictional universe. We have our this, that, and the other, and people can, you know, in their heads bring that to whatever level they want. You know, I know there are people out there who just like to strap on the gear and bonk each other in the head, and that's fine. But there's other people who, you know, when they're putting on the gear, they're thinking about putting on their, you know, real armor, and they've got the whole thing going on in their head too, you know. And, you know, maybe from the outside, it doesn't look like either one of them is different, but you gotta
well, it's, you know, that's an interesting point because it's like when you listen to music or you watch a performance, the audience, I mean, how much are you aware of the process of the artist? Right. So it's kind of like the same, you know, if you see this form I'm doing, how much are you understanding my process of being in it? And how narcissistic for you to apply your consciousness of what you think martial arts is to what I do.
Yeah, I mean, the ability, the reason we don't talk about martial arts, it's not, unless you're into martial arts, it's not interesting, you know, all that kind of thing. So these, I don't know, it's very much like creativity and other creative things, right? To people who don't do those things or whom those do not come naturally to, I think it seems a lot like magic a lot of times, right? To where, because they don't have the access to that process, right?
I hear you. And they, you know, and I think a lot of, I see this a lot when I teach my kids because some of the kids come to me and they have no idea what to do. And all of a sudden, like a year later, they're running up a wall and rolling off of it. Like they run and kick off and they roll. And when they came to me, they couldn't even begin to do a push-up. And, you know, the way is in training. And when you train, you just become something different. And for those, you're right, those are the people who don't train and they look and they see something. It's like when you look at a dance performance, like you look at those ballet dancers and these effortless like jumps or anything else, but those aren't effortless.
Yeah.
Damn,
That's the
it's
thing.
years and years and years of training. And I think that is also another aspect of denial, is that people are looking for something quick, and there's no shortcuts in martial arts.
No, none at
That's
all.
why I'm not a big fan of using the word talent, because martial arts is always something that I've done because I love it, and partly necessity growing up where I grew up. But my profession, as far as my professional career, was being a musician. And you would do a performance, or somebody would hear a recording and say, "You're so talented. Oh, it's so easy." And I'm like, no, I'm sitting there woodshedding, playing the guitar, and that saying, for hours and hours and hours when I was a kid, and to this day, if I don't pick my guitar up, I lose it. You start losing it. So yeah, like you said, it's the training, and people might have this illusion that, oh, you're just born with it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, people are born with gifts. However, hard work can beat talent. You know what I'm saying with that? And you work hard, you get it. Some people are natural. I've known a lot of martial artists who were growing up are naturally gifted fighters and movers, but when they ran into their first huge obstacle, gone.
That's the thing. Like, I know a lot of fighters who were like undefeated until their first loss, and then they quit.
Victory and defeat is part of the warrior's life.
But yeah, so I kind of look at like talent in a different way, like with the British kind of tinge to it, where it's something that, when you say like the slang British, like my British friends when I was in college would call people talent, and it's like, okay, that makes sense. It's attractive to you, because I think where the whole idea of talent comes from is like, yeah, you, me, pretty much everybody on this panel, most of the people watching, we can lock ourselves into a room and think about this kind of stuff for hours upon hours upon hours upon hours. But you do this to probably a lot of people out there, and they would want to kill themselves.
Well, it's like the same with anything. Like, how many people want to really, like, bringing it back to music, Anthony, I think music is a perfect example of it. It's like, how many people want to practice their damn scales? And how many people want to know their chord inversions? And how many people want to write 2, 3, 4 part counterpoint over and over and over and over and over and over again to your hands?
And that's just preparation.
That's just preparation. Yeah.
I mean, it's song.
Like, no, it's easy. I'm just going to get my
write a song.
Apple loops.
Like,
and that's cool too.
I've actually come out of retirement from music. I retired from music in 2011 from like a very long time of performing. And I'm no longer performing, but I decided to come back as a writer. And boy, is it hard. I mean, I'm having to relearn all these skills that I forgot, and I'm like, oh, I got to write a verse and it's not going with the pre-chorus, and what's wrong with me? And I find myself going back to school, so to speak, So yeah, it's a skill, and you have to work it and work it and work it. And if you take breaks, what's that old saying? If you forget it for 1 day, it forgets you for 2.
Yeah, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean,
the Chinese saying is miss 1 day of practice, have to make up 10.
Yeah, it's the same, I think, with any art, as we all discussed before, and with music. And I say Apple loops, they're fun. I use Apple loops all the time. They are super fun to do. But I don't do them but those kind of tools are tools, right? Once they become a reliant thing, it's like when you recognize music in films. Like, if you think of a film and can't think of the music, then interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're kind of at the end here. Ben, do you have anything to add here before we?
Just a topic I'd like to put out for consideration next time.
Yes.
Right. I'm interested in how people talk about, and we were circling around it the entire time. I'm interested in how people talk about authenticity and fantasy. in the martial
Yes.
arts, right? And one of the things that we really strongly see with the sword, with weapons training, is people who are coming out of that traditional cultural lineage route saying what we do is authentic, right?
Mhm.
But recently we've had a group of people who have looked at manuals, they have looked at old weapons, and they've kind of done what HEMA people have done, right? Where they've tried to rebuild Chinese fencing from the ground up, right? And, they've looked at the lineage people saying, you guys can't fight. What you do is crap,
Mm.
right? So we're actually going to experiment. We're going to look at stuff in museums. We're going to look at old books, and we are going to do something that's not fantasy, right? What you guys do is fantasy, whereas the people in the lineages look at them and say, you don't really understand what those books meant, right?
Mm.
There's no way you can reconstruct, patterns of damage on weapons that you saw in museums. What you're doing is total fantasy, right? And honestly,
Oh
I love
God, these
fantasy.
people.
This is why I'm part of TPLA, because I love the idea that you can give yourself a creative room to do research to discover what it is that the human body is capable of doing, right? And that's
Yeah, it's like, why can't you just do both? Like, what the hell's wrong with this? Like,
Yeah.
I don't understand. Oh, well, my form has everything. Well, you know what? It probably doesn't. And those books probably don't have everything either. And, if you just start walking towards a direction and you're really cool with people and you get to know people and you train, you're probably going to learn a heck of a lot more than complaining about everything else.
But this seems to be the point that we're at right now in
Yes.
weapons and swords. This is the dominant debate that I think is structuring things. These two different pejorative, tossings of the term fantasy at each other, or two very different ways of understanding what it means to be legitimate. And so, we're in this odd position that, nobody did combative Chinese weapon work until, I don't know, 15 years ago, so very, very recently, right? And then suddenly it's exploded, and now we have like these two competing visions of it. But again, I can't help but think that there isn't something ideological at the base of it, that there's some
Oh,
more
absolutely.
fundamental cultural dispute going on here.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Maybe we can slate that for next week, for the discussion for next week.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, because we can get the other guys into that one as well. We can
Cool.
branch out into the other things, because it's I mean, that's the thing. What's authentic? What's fantasy? Everything's got a little bit of both, right? Like we were talking about with the performance thing, Damon, where it's like the performance may be fake, but it is simulating something real. And nowadays, that's the only place that you're going to get into real danger with a sword, because other areas that you're going to be using that sword, you'll have protective gear on. Sure, you're not trying to kill each other, but that thing will, so it's like,
Hey man, you can cut
Yeah.
yourself on paper, dude.
yeah. So I think that's a great topic to go into next time, is authenticity versus fraud, or counterfeit, or whatever we want. Fantasy. There we go. Authenticity, fantasy. So there we
Cool.
go. So
Well,
I
it's really
guess,
good seeing all of you guys.
yep. So we will end today. Daniel did not make it back in, but we'll say goodbye to him. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me for this thing. Thank you for everybody out there. I know we went over a little bit, but well, hopefully you got a little bit more out of it. So from all of us here at TPLA, we will bid you good day. Have a good one. Stay safe. Patience, practice, perseverance. Happy sabering.